In the summer of 2012, in the Polish city of Częstochowa, Marta, a 19-year-old student, disappeared without a trace. After an argument with her boyfriend, she took the bus to a neighboring city. At that time, no one knew that Marta was alive but trapped. She had been kidnapped and held captive for almost a decade, deprived of all signs of normal life and her freedom. The world saw her again only after 7 years, and this was already a completely different Marta. On the 20th of July 2012, Marta planned to spend the weekend with her aunt in the neighboring city of Opole. She chose the evening bus, bought a ticket only for the outbound journey, and left the house without taking anything unnecessary, only a small bag, documents, a mobile phone, and some cash. None of her relatives attached importance to this circumstance. Marta had long been an adult and could decide for herself how she wanted to organize her trip. According to her boyfriend Jakub, Marta was very troubled about something before her departure, even irritated. At the police station, he later testified that the reason was a small dispute, an everyday argument, as often happened. But at the next interrogation, he surprisingly changed his statement and insisted that Marta had been completely calm and even cheerful, as if something had pleased her. The police recorded these statements but set them aside without attaching great importance to them. However, a neighbor, an elderly woman named Janina, unexpectedly claimed that she had seen Marta the day after the official date of her disappearance. According to the woman, she was walking calmly down the street in the company of an unknown man, tall and thin, whom Janina had never encountered before. This detail significantly confused the investigative work and called into question the original version according to which Marta's disappearance occurred immediately after the bus arrived in Opole. Jakub's statements raised more and more questions. The young man sometimes forgot details, got confused in the sequence of events, and sometimes showed nervousness and irritability. The investigators immediately began to suspect him of involvement in the disappearance. The police conducted several interrogations, even called in a psychologist to find out whether Jakub was hiding something bigger. Nevertheless, no direct evidence against the young man was found, and soon the investigation reached a dead end. The second suspect was the unknown man whom the neighbor had noticed. The police tried to reconstruct his image based on Janina's statements, but the created phantom image was too blurred and brought no results. The surveillance camera recordings from the bus station were also checked, but the only thing that could be found was the barely recognizable silhouette of a man walking next to Marta. His face was hidden by a hood. The investigators focused their attention on Jakub, his behavior, the constant changes in his statements, his emotional instability. All this spoke against him. The police obtained permission to check his phone calls, searched his apartment, but again found nothing suspicious. Meanwhile, the young man, feeling persecuted, began to avoid contact with the police, refused public comments, and eventually even moved to another city. Gradually, his figure receded into the background. But all this time, no one asked why Marta had bought only a one-way ticket. No one posed the question of why her mobile phone stopped sending signals just 1 hour after boarding the bus. These details remained unnoticed, and the investigation gradually came to a halt, making way for new, more current incidents. In November 2019, a seemingly insignificant event occurred in a quiet suburb of Częstochowa. Neighbors turned to the police with complaints about a strange smell coming from the house of a social worker, 50-year-old Marek Lewandowski. The man enjoyed the respect of the people around him, worked with problem families, helped the homeless, and was repeatedly awarded for his contribution to the public life of the city. Nothing pointed to him as a potential criminal. When the police arrived at his house, nothing seemed suspicious. An ordinary, well-maintained house of an average resident. But during the inspection of the basement, the officers noticed a massive cabinet that was pushed too close to the wall. The employees moved the furniture and discovered behind it a metal door that led to a carefully hidden room. Inside reigned darkness, stuffy air, and absolutely uninhabitable conditions. And then, They saw her. On a dirty mattress sat a woman, exhausted, who barely showed signs that she understood what was happening. She remained silent and only stared at one point. It was Marta, the same Marta who had disappeared in 2012. All this time she had been nearby, very close to her parental home, but completely cut off from the world, deprived of all human dignity, transformed into a being without past and future. The police officers understood. The Marta case had just begun, and the whole truth was still hidden in the darkness of this room. The past of Marta's boyfriend gradually began to come to light. The investigation began to examine every detail of his biography and established that Jakub was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. The formerly quiet and inconspicuous boy suddenly acquired much more complex features. The police officers, following the versions of Marta's disappearance, decided to examine her boyfriend's figure more closely. Initially, this seemed like a formality, a necessary step in the work. But soon, disturbing details emerged. It turned out that Jakub was already known to the police. His name appeared in a case that was conducted just 1 year before Marta's disappearance. According to official documents, Jakub was arrested in February 2011 on charges of aggressive behavior. The incident occurred at a party in the center of Częstochowa. Several witnesses claimed that Jakub, after a brief exchange of words, suddenly attacked an acquaintance and inflicted serious injuries on him. The victim filed a complaint with the police, but the case was quickly closed after the parties reached an agreement among themselves. Although the charges were officially dropped, information about the boy's aggressive tendencies remained in police archives and now played against him. This data prompted the police to pay special attention to the young man again. Previously, they had considered his confused statements, but now the investigation had a real reason to doubt his sincerity. During questioning, Jakub showed clear nervousness when confronted with questions about the earlier conflict. The police noticed how his mood changed as soon as they talked about that evening. The boy either tried to evade the answer or said that it had been a mistake, and he had long since changed, but the words sounded uncertain, not convincing, and this only intensified the suspicions. One day, an unexpected witness came to the investigators. A young man named Paweł, who claimed to have seen Jakub and Marta arguing on the day of her disappearance. His statements brought even more chaos to the picture of events. Paweł claimed that around 6 o'clock in the evening, when he was standing not far from the bus stop, he accidentally witnessed an emotional conflict. He clearly heard raised voices, saw violent gestures, how Jakub grabbed the girl by the arms and she tried to break free. The witness decided not to intervene, but later, when he learned of Marta's disappearance, decided to testify. This information further supported the investigators' version of Jakub's possible involvement in the disappearance. After the emergence of this data, the investigation organized several more harsh and persistent interrogations for Jakub. The police began to check literally every word of his statements, every time period, trying to find a gap in his version. It turned out that the boy's alibi, which had previously seemed convincing, began to crumble under closer examination. Previously, Jakub had assured the investigation that after accompanying Marta to the bus, he immediately went home, where he remained until late evening. But checking his mobile phone data showed that he left the house several times and even moved around the city in the following hours. When asked why he left the house, Jakub was confused and could not give a reasonable answer. The police carefully studied the surveillance camera recordings. The times and places that Jakub indicated did not match what the video cameras recorded. In one case, he said he had been at home, but the cameras showed his figure on the street. When presented with this fact, the boy first denied it, then admitted that he had indeed left the house, but could not explain why. Gradually, a picture emerged in which Jakub looked guilty. His reputation, tainted by the past, his chaotic and confused answers to questions, as well as the constant contradictions that became increasingly obvious, gave the investigation the right to believe that they were on the right path. The investigation seemed to be approaching its end. Marta's boyfriend looked more and more like the main culprit of what happened. Under the pressure of evidence, the investigators practically stopped checking other versions. All attention focused exclusively on Jakub. His every movement was tracked. Every word was checked and rechecked. The police prepared materials for transfer to the court, convinced that the case was practically solved. Neighbors and acquaintances of Marta's family already spoke about the guilty party being found, and the news spread quickly throughout the city, making the young man's life practically unbearable. He stopped leaving the house, broke off all contacts with friends and relatives, and felt isolated and condemned. But when the investigators had almost definitively formulated the version of the young man's guilt, a completely unexpected witness appeared. It was the bus driver with whom Marta was supposed to travel to the neighboring city. The driver clearly remembered the evening of departure and the girl who got on the bus alone without accompaniment. He clearly remembered that the boy only accompanied her to the bus door and then remained standing at the stop until the bus drove away. These words drastically changed the entire picture of the investigation, and the seemingly already closed case took a completely new, unexpected turn again. After the bus driver confirmed that Marta indeed went on the journey alone, the investigation took a sharp turn in another direction. Now the investigators returned to examining the girl's closest environment. Unexpectedly, the focus of attention was her family, where, as it soon turned out, deep conflicts previously unknown to anyone were hidden. During a more thorough examination of Marta's relatives, the police discovered a strange inconsistency. It turned out that the girl grew up in an atmosphere of constant tension, although the family tried to carefully hide this from foreign eyes. Particularly tense was the relationship between Marta and her stepfather, Tomasz. Until now, this detail appears nowhere in the case and was recorded nowhere. The investigators decided to examine more closely the personality of the stepfather, who previously appeared flawless and reliable. Tomasz had been living with the family for more than 10 years, had a good position in the city administration, and always enjoyed the respect of neighbors and colleagues. Outwardly, nothing betrayed his tense relationship with his stepdaughter, but upon closer examination, the picture became much darker. During new interrogations, Marta's mother, Alicja, gave strange and contradictory statements. In one moment, she claimed that the relationship between her daughter and her husband had been ideal, trusting and calm. Then suddenly, as if in a slip of the tongue, she admitted that conflicts regularly arose between them, the cause of which remained unclear even to her. The investigators noticed how difficult it was for her to maintain a line of behavior, as if she was trying to convince them and herself that everything in her family was calm and prosperous. These contradictions became even clearer when the police began questioning Tomasz himself. Marta's stepfather, normally calm and self-confident, now appeared tense and irritated. He began avoiding direct answers and gave vague explanations about where he was on the day of his stepdaughter's disappearance. The investigators immediately realized that the man was hiding something or trying to conceal something. The police officers decided to re-examine the circumstances of the day when Marta disappeared, now orienting themselves according to the words of family members and the closest environment. Already, the first hours of interrogations revealed serious inconsistencies in the statements that had previously remained unnoticed. For example, Tomasz insisted that he had spent the entire day at work and returned home only late in the evening, and learned about his stepdaughter's disappearance only from his wife. But Marta's mother, Alicja, mentioned in another conversation by chance that Tomasz was at home at noon, and even spoke with Marta shortly before her departure. When she understood that she had revealed a new detail, the woman tried to correct the situation, but the words had already been captured by the investigation and raised new questions. Another close friend of the family, a neighbor named Andrzej, testified that he had more than once witnessed raised voices and arguments between Tomasz and Marta. Once, when passing by the house, he heard the girl emotionally calling back to her stepfather that she could no longer endure his demands. Yet previously, no one from the family had even mentioned such conflicts. As a result of the interrogations, it became obvious that tension had existed in the family for a long time. known only to the closest relatives. This tension could somehow be connected to the girl's disappearance. The investigation began working on a new hypothesis. Perhaps the stepfather knew much more about the situation than he told the police. Soon, Marta's stepfather became the main suspect. His personality was thoroughly examined, and it was established that Tomasz had skillfully avoided explanations for his actions several times when the conversation concerned the day of his stepdaughter's disappearance. Moreover, gaps in his alibi were uncovered. The man could not provide convincing evidence confirming his whereabouts during some key hours of that day. His interrogations became increasingly tense. Tomasz became confused in his answers, was nervous, and from a certain point stopped answering altogether and used his right not to testify against himself. All this strengthened the version that he could be connected to Marta's disappearance. Soon, rumors circulated in the city that the police had found a culprit again, and this time it was someone whom many considered an exemplary family father. Despite the apparent clarity of the situation, however, there was still no direct evidence of his involvement in the girl's disappearance. The investigation had nothing available except suspicious gaps in the statements and obvious, but nonetheless indirect testimonies of tense relationships in the family. At this moment, when the investigation had seemingly come maximally close to the riddle of the family secret, a new, unexpected turn came into the case. An anonymous note fell into the hands of the police officers, which was sent by mail to the police station without a sender's address and signature. The brief text suggested that Marta probably hid something important from her relatives, which was connected not to the family, but to someone completely foreign. The note turned the entire case around again and forced the investigators to consider that the true key to solving the mystery might not lie in her family environment at all, but somewhere completely different. After the appearance of the mysterious note, the investigators focused on searching for Marta's external connections that could shed light on her disappearance. Unexpectedly discovered financial documents led them in a completely unexpected direction. The name that appeared in the documents belonged to a local social worker who had never previously come into the police's field of vision. When checking the anonymous information, the police encountered a man named Marek Lewandowski, who was widely known in the city as a conscientious and respected employee of the social service. Marek regularly helped those in need, families in difficult situations, and people who are normally avoided in society. Therefore, his reputation was impeccable, and the investigators initially doubted whether such a person could be connected to the girl's disappearance. Soon, however, financial documents fell into the hands of the police that indicated Marek's connection to questionable money schemes. These papers were found quite by chance in one of the abandoned offices that Lewandowski had used several years ago. Among the papers appeared the names of several people who were officially considered missing. Despite the absence of these people, social benefits continued to be regularly transferred to their accounts, which were then withdrawn and disappeared in unknown directions. One name in the list stood out clearly from the others: Marta. The police checked the bank accounts and found that after her disappearance, state benefits were still regularly transferred for almost 3 years. This was completely new information that had never previously come into the field of investigation. After a few days, the investigators met a man named Lukasz, a witness who surprisingly reported that he had seen the social worker and Marta on the day of her disappearance. Lukasz remembered how in the evening, about half an hour before the bus departure, Marek and the girl were standing near a small cafe not far from the station. The witness claimed that the conversation looked quite serious, but he noticed nothing suspicious at the time. Only later, when information about Marta's disappearance appeared in the press, did Lukasz recognize the significance of what he had seen. The investigation began to examine Lewandowski's activities closely, but encountered serious resistance. The locals, especially those who used his help, began with one voice to defend the social worker, emphasizing how much he had done for the city. Witnesses who had previously worked with him described Marek as a person who selflessly helped those in need. They assured that such accusations were absurd and could only be a random coincidence. Marek Lewandowski himself behaved confidently and calmly during interrogations. He readily confirmed that he indeed spoke with Marta that day and explained the meeting with purely professional motives. According to his words, Marta approached him for advice on social assistance questions for one of her friends. Lewandowski convincingly emphasized that such conversations were common and led to nothing serious. Nevertheless, the financial documents were real and aroused serious suspicions. Why were payments made for several more years after the girl's disappearance? Marek could not answer this question. He claimed that he simply did his work and did not control banking operations, shifting responsibility to accounting. But accounting, as it turned out, had no information about such schemes. Despite the obvious contradictions, the investigation surprisingly focused again on Marta's family and her boyfriend. The brief meeting near the cafe seemed too insignificant a detail against the background of the many questions that continued to surround the stepfather and Jakub. Again began the verification of their statements, and Marek Lewandowski's case temporarily receded into the background. It seemed as if the police had again lost the main focus of the investigation and plunged into already processed versions. The investigators organized repeated interrogations and tried to find a gap in the alibi of Jakub and Tomasz, but could not gather new information. Everything that previously seemed suspicious received no further confirmation, and soon the investigation came to a standstill again. When the investigation already threatened to reach a dead end again, the police unexpectedly received new information from one of the witnesses who had previously defended Lewandowski. A man who wanted to remain anonymous suddenly confessed that he had lied when confirming the social worker's innocence. He told that he did this at Marek's personal request, who convinced him that the police were trying to destroy his reputation and the work of his life. The witness admitted that Lewandowski indeed behaved suspiciously several times and forced many around him to remain silent about some details of his activities. This confession immediately changed the picture of the investigation. The social worker, who previously appeared as a model of decency, again came into the investigators' sights, who now had a weighty reason to re-examine all available information about Marek and his possible connection to Marta's disappearance. After the police received the witness's confession about false statements, all details began to quickly come together into a unified picture. It became finally clear that behind Marta's disappearance stood a person whom no one seriously suspected for a long time: social worker Marek Lewandowski. He, who appeared to everyone as an exemplary citizen and caring helper of those in need, turned out to be a person capable of a cruel crime to preserve his reputation. On that summer day, Marta indeed wanted to go to Opole, as witnesses had already reported. However, while waiting for the bus, she accidentally became a witness to a telephone conversation by Lewandowski, which he carelessly conducted on the street. In the conversation, the social worker mentioned sums of money, names of missing persons, and schemes for paying out social benefits through fictitious accounts. Marta, who did not fully understand what she heard, nevertheless realized that she had accidentally become a witness to a serious crime. When Marek noticed her nearby, he immediately ended the call and approached her to understand what exactly she had heard. The frightened Marta, who wanted no problems, tried to leave, but the social worker insisted on a conversation. He suggested going to a nearby cafe where he cautiously began to determine whether the girl had recognized the seriousness of what she heard. When Marta, troubled and not interested in problems, said that she understood nothing and did not want to approach anyone, Marek did not believe her. In fear of exposure, he made a hasty decision to persuade her to get into his car, promising to discuss the situation calmly. But instead of a conversation, he brought her to his own house, where a small secret room was already set up, which he sometimes used to temporarily hide documents and funds obtained fraudulently. There he locked Marta up, assuming that he would soon solve the problem and find a way to get rid of the threat of disclosure. But days became weeks, weeks became months, and the man found no way out of the situation. The girl remained captive with him, actually completely cut off from the outside world. At the same time, the frightened and confused family members and Marta's friend gave confused and contradictory statements. Their confusion was explained only by fear of possible accusations and complete misunderstanding of the situation. In fact, neither her boyfriend Nor her stepfather nor her mother had anything to do with the disappearance. Their only guilt was that in panic, they made mistakes that distracted the investigation from the true perpetrator. Now, after the witness admitted to making false statements, Lewandowski's entire fraudulent scheme was finally exposed. Checks showed that over several years he had managed to embezzle large sums of money intended for helping those in need. In the lists of people who received support, investigators discovered several more names of missing persons. It became obvious that Marta was far from the only person who accidentally learned about the man's crimes. When Marek understood that the police had finally come upon his trail, he decided to flee. He left everything behind and headed for the border with Germany, hoping to lose himself among many tourists. The police, who received timely information about his intentions, organized a task force to intercept him. The situation developed rapidly. Marek was arrested literally in the last minutes before he could cross the border. The interrogations proceeded quickly. The social worker, standing under the weight of irrefutable evidence, confessed everything. He told how over long years he organized and maintained criminal schemes, how he held Marta captive, and what he planned to do next. Lewandowski did not try to justify himself and admitted that he was trapped by his own actions and took a desperate step to hide his crimes. On the same day, the police freed Marta. The girl, who had spent almost 10 years in a closed room, was physically and psychologically completely broken. Doctors confirmed that the consequences of her captivity could never be fully overcome. Her memory was damaged by the long years of isolation and stress, and her condition did not allow her to lead a normal life. Marta was saved, but her former personality was lost forever. Marek Lewandowski was found guilty on a whole series of charges and received a sentence of 25 years imprisonment. The court passed its verdict quickly and impartially, recognizing the severity of his actions. The reputation that the man had so carefully built over years was destroyed within a few days, and his name became synonymous with betrayal and fraud. This story has no happy ending. Yes, the truth was revealed, the perpetrator punished, Marta freed, but too late to save what was lost. Adults, serious people who have heard this story should recognize the gravity and fragility of human fate. For sometimes the truth is more frightening than any imagination.